Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Now this may be the very last HFP suspension for an 8th gen Civic. New in box still from Honda. I got this last fall and it's been sitting in the garage all winter. And today I'm going to be installing it into my 2010 Civic LX Sport. So right now it's got the mushy soft four-door suspension on it. If you put two people in the back seat, you'll pretty much bottom out the car in the bump stops. So this is going to be a huge upgrade and also lower the car just under an inch, so it'll look a little better too. This is the part number, which is one of the last ones you can buy new from the dealer. All the SI specific HFP suspensions are discontinued and unavailable, and the coupes are unavailable as well, and the automatic four doors are unavailable as well. So this part number for this one, as you can see there, is specific to a base model four door with a manual transmission. It's exactly what the part number is for. And it's probably one of the last ones you can buy new from Honda, and probably because they didn't make too many manual four doors compared to every other trim level. So I'm going to go ahead and reap the benefits of it and get it installed today. The car has 180,000 miles and it's going to be refreshed with this suspension, brand new end links, and also a SI rear sway bar to help the car rotate a little better. It's going to make it a lot more fun of a daily driver. So as you can see, this is straight from Japan. And go ahead and open it. You know, this box has probably been sitting on a warehouse shelf somewhere for 10 years, at least 10 years, because my car's a 2010. Some information packet here, information to add to your owner's manual for HFP suspension. But everything's boxed nicely. Open this. Brand new hardware, which is super nice. Brand new hardware to install on all the connections to the car, and my car is driven every winter, so it's got 10 winters on it now. So the new hardware will be fantastic, help everything last a little bit longer, and look really nice when I put it back together. So these boxes on each end are the rear springs. I'm going to have to remember, so when I put my stock suspension back in this box, of where everything goes. So you got your rear springs, your two front struts here and here, and then the rear gas shocks are back in this one individually in each one. So we go ahead and do the front first. As you can see, I got the car on jack stands now to replace the front struts, and those are the easier ones to do. So go ahead and take these out and see how they look. See, here it is, brand new HFP strut assembly, 8th gen Civic, and I'm not exactly sure. I know there's a color chart online for what the purple and white spring stiffness means. I don't know how that compares to the HFP suspension I had in my SI. I assume this is probably a little softer than the HFP upgrade for the SI, because this car is 200 pounds lighter than an SI, so I'm sure they tuned it a little bit different. So actually this car, one thing I will say is with the suspension and the SI rear sway bar on this particular car, it'll probably out-handle an SI in the turns, mainly because it's almost 250 pounds lighter than an SI four-door. I mean, this car is curb weight of 2620, I think. It's said in the title. And it's a really light car, so 250 pounds less than an SI, and just as capable of a suspension. Should feel a little more lively. Here's the two struts side by side. One's got an L on them for the left side, which is the driver's side. This one's got an R on it for the passenger side. And something that's interesting is there are actually different spring rates for the left and the right on the front. That's how specifically tuned this is for the car. You know, you see purple paint here and red paint, and then this is white and purple. So I assume this one might be a little bit stiffer because the left side of the car has a little more load than the right side, especially with the driver. So that might be compensating for it to keep it level, more so level when I sit in the car. Definitely going to be a huge upgrade from the stock mushy stuff, because I'm sure the stock suspension on this is not tuned that specifically. Alright, so here's the before shot of the car. As you can see, 180,000 miles, 10 winters in it from New York. Seen plenty of salt, but I have fluid film undercoated this every winter since I bought it in 2015, so not as horrible as some, I'm sure, but definitely room for improvement. Take these two bolts off. Already disconnected the brake line, took the ABS sensor off, and there's 3 bolts up top, right through this cavity right here. Once you do undo this, a 19mm hex, 17 on the other side. This comes out relatively easy, and the fronts are a breeze to do. Alright, so here's the comparison with the OEM driver's side front strut, and they're lined up pretty evenly up top here, and you can see the OEM one is roughly almost an inch longer physical size uncompressed than the HFP, and it looks like the coils are somewhat similar, but there might be one less coil. I see 4 here and pretty much 3 there, so a little bit less coils will give a little bit stiffer of a spring rate. The size, diameter of the actual wire itself for the spring looks to be the same, but should be a sweet upgrade to such an old and high mileage car. Alright, so the front struts are in, and I'll show you those in a second, and I replaced the 2 bolts that secure the strut to the knuckle. But they give you all this hardware. These are the old bolts that for the front struts to the knuckle, but I assume these 2 secure the shocks, the rear shocks down inside the car. I remember those from my SI. I'm not sure what these longer bolts are for, and I've got 2 sets. Pretty much have 6 bolts left, and these are some new nuts as well. I'm not sure, actually, just kidding, I got 8 bolts left. I'm not completely sure what those all go to if you're just replacing the suspension. My car, I'm going to move on to the rear in a second, but the front, the bolts inside here, the 3 nuts that hold the top of the strut down, those you have to reuse because they don't supply you new ones. The only ones on the front that the HFP kit supplied to replace were these 2 that secure the strut to the knuckle. So those are replaced, and those look beautiful, and the top ones weren't rusty at all. They look brand new still, so can't complain there, but I'm confused why we're gonna have extra hardware here. You know, I got 8 bolts left. Obviously the rear springs don't take any bolts to hold them in, just the struts do. And the struts really only take, you know, 1 nut at the top here, and then 1 bolt to mount the bushing to the rear control arm, and that's it. So I got 8 bolts to do that. I'm not too sure, but maybe they're included to replace other bolts underneath. I'm not sure. I'll take a look. Alright guys, so I think I figured out the majority of the bolt situation. These longer ones they include, they actually replace this one right here, I think. Yep, which is the upper control arm to the knuckle. That bolt goes right there. They give you a new one for that, and then they give you a new one for the shock, to connecting to the control arm down there, or the brace piece down there. So they give you those 2, and the 4, I don't know if this is like zinc coated or whatnot. These kind of look a little bit greenish compared to these. These 4, I believe, are for the upper control arms to connect to the frame, the ones that are way back in there. If you have a higher mileage 8th gen like mine and have seen a few winners, the threaded inserts in the frame, you know, they're not very easy to replace. I've actually had a buddy, and if you've seen in my YouTube, I had a video of how he tried to remove these with a lot of winners on his car, and he had a, you know, he was going to do adjustable upper control arms for adjustable camber, but when he went to remove the bolts, it stripped out, and it actually broke the bolt inside of the frame, and he had to cut out those brackets that were welded into the frame and replace that. That is a huge pain. So mine bolt heads do have quite a bit of rust. I've tried to remove them, and I got some resistance, so I'm going to leave the original bolts securing this to the frame because it's really not worth it at this point for me to want to replace those and create a bigger project. If they were to snap, I would be, you know, my heart would sink, and I would have a huge project to replace as opposed to just leaving them, because I'm not going to do any adjustable camber on this car. I'm just going to put the HFP on, SI rear sway bar, all new end links for the sway bars, and just leave the stock camber settings. This 2010 model had the fixed revision to where, you know, they had a C stamped upper arm, which is basically just a revision to the arm. They said it has a C stamped in the arm somewhere, but I can't see because they're coated with fluid film. But what that means is they were a little longer, and they prevented the excessive camber issue from the early 8th gens that wore out the rear tires and also made the car handle worse. If you have more than like -1 degrees of camber in the rear, it's totally unnecessary for a front-wheel drive car. You want it to be like -1 or slightly less in the rear and more camber up front. Even though mine's not adjustable up front, I'm not making this car a track car. It's probably going to sit right around 0 up front and probably -1 in the rear. But just keep that in mind if you're doing this into a higher mileage car. Replacing that may be tricky. So anyways, after that long rant, all I did was remove the bolt from here. That nut dropped the knuckle and the spring was in there, and then I removed the bolt from the shock down here, and you can push down very lightly on this and pull the spring out by hand. It really wasn't that hard. And I still got to remove the shock, so all you got to do is push back the trunk lining a little bit, and you can get to the top of the shock right there quite easily. And that's the new bolt they include is on the top of there. I think you're going to reuse this washer. I'm not 100% sure yet, but pretty much just undo that, the shock will drop out, and you're ready to put in the new one. Alright guys, so here we are back a couple days later. I ran into a little problem which I kind of thought might be a problem going forward, but couldn't find an answer for online. So I just waited until I had the SI rear sway bar ready to go in, and then I realized that the distance of these two mounting bracket holes, since it's a thicker sway bar and has a much thicker bushing, is longer than the OEM tiny puny sway bar. So the brackets had to come off the car, these brackets right here. These guys, so those mount the sway bar brackets that I just showed you to the frame of the car. So those came off, and it's not a huge deal because I got two from Honda within a couple days shipping from Majestic Honda, and these are the SI rear sway brackets, so they bolt into the same place and just have a little bit wider hole spacing with the weld nuts for the SI rear sway bracket bars, and these are only $10 a piece, so $20 there. And I got 8 new bolts to secure everything to the frame, so should last another 10 years, no problem. Be able to get them off, no problem, because the stuff I took out was pretty corroded from 10 winters on the car. So these are only like $1 a piece, so I got like 28 bucks here in brackets and hardware. This is the SI rear sway bar. I have it prepped with brand new end links, just like the front. And I'm gonna go ahead and get ready to put that in now. The brackets bolt up underneath the car. I'll show you right here where they are, what I'm talking about. You can see I got the SI rear muffler on there. It's pretty dirty, starting to get a little rust in the back here, but it's a lot better than the stock one that was on here. They don't last too many winters. As you can see, I got the HFP suspension, all the rear suspension all in, torqued down and everything. But these are the brackets I'm talking about. They bolt to the frame right there. And the other one, and then the other one underneath the driver's side is right there. So those were a little tricky to get out. I couldn't get PB blaster on the end of them or anything because the inside of that frame is captive. So be careful because I was worried about stripping those threads out when removing those screws. But overall, the underneath of this car with almost 200,000 miles, besides the fuel tank strap now, that's got a lot of fluid film caked on it still from last winter, but that's always been in rough shape. But for the most part, the underneath of the car for a New York car is very clean. You guys probably saw my video of the HRV having pretty much rotted out exhaust flanges from year one. And this exhaust on this car all the way to the header still has the bolts clean enough to where I could disassemble it with some minor PB blaster and probably not even a torch. So very impressed with how this car is holding up underneath compared to the newer Hondas. But go ahead and put those brackets on now. Alright, so this job's finally complete. SI sway bar in there, no problem. And there's the brand new end link, as you can see. I'm going to get underneath the car and just show you fitting it. And you can see there's my new bracket mounted to the frame, and it holds the SI sway bar right there. It does get very close to the control arm with the threads and whatnot, but plenty of clearance there. Move over to this side. See the brand new end links on this side. There is the bracket and the SI sway bar. Contours nicely along here, and you can still get to the fuel tank screws with it, of course. Definitely a huge, beefier upgrade than the OEM Civic LX bar. And I'm gonna set it down on the ground now and let it settle for a little while, and then shoot a video here for you guys in a couple weeks to show the drop in ride height. Alright, so here's a look at the car before HFP suspension install. Got the EP3 wheels on it. Wheel gap in the front, and there's your wheel gap in the rear. I'm going to take measurements from the center cap, the center of the center cap, to the fender, the painted fender on each side, and report back what the before and after was. Hey guys, so I'm back here about 6 months later since the start of this video that I filmed when I installed all these components. It's December now, the same year. I installed them around May. I've been working from home for all these months this year with COVID, and haven't really put a ton of miles on this car. Not nearly as many as I normally would. I probably have 3,000 miles on it now, but the suspension has had about 6 months to settle. I've got an alignment recently. As you can see, I have the MB weapons on the car from my SI. So to give you guys information on how much the car lowered, I just took measurements from the center of the center caps to the fender, and the measurements I'm getting are 13 3/4 all the way around now. Before the suspension install, it was 14 inches in the front and 14 1/4 in the rear, so the rear actually sat a little bit higher than the front. And now with this suspension, all 4 corners are pretty much equal. They all have pretty much the same amount of wheel gap, and the rear lowered about a 1/2 inch, I would say, and the front lowered about a 1/4 inch. Not a huge drop. I thought it would be closer to an inch, but I'm actually okay with that because this is a daily driver and I didn't really want to lower the car too much. Perfectly fine with the amount of drop, and I can still slide my advanced auto part ramps under the front and do oil changes and drive up on ramps still. So one thing I will say is the car is an absolute joy to drive now. It took all the sloppy and numb handling away from the car and feels just as lively as my SI did. And this car has some advantages over the SI, actually, in my opinion. The hydraulic steering rack gives you way more feel than the electric steering rack in the SI. You can actually feel the road texture. So this car definitely has a much better steering feel than the SI, in my opinion. The ratios between the SI and this car must be very close because I don't notice any, slower rotation of the steering wheel for my inputs on this car. It definitely reacts very quick and it feels just as sporty as the SI. The only thing now is down on power compared to the SI, but the handling is definitely on par with the SI, since they're pretty much the same car now handling wise. But this car is almost 250 pounds lighter than the SI, so it almost feels a little more lively in the corners. And the combination of the Civic, the stock LX front sway bar, and the SI rear is a better combination than the SI front and rear, because you want to soften the front as much as you can and stiffen the rear. Now I could have got a much stiffer rear sway bar, but for a daily driver the SI sway bar was cheap and definitely not overkill and still handles the bumps very well. But night and day difference between the stock suspension that comes on 8th gen Civics. The LX, DX, and EX models all have soft suspensions. Now when I sit on the bumper in the back, the suspension doesn't compress much at all. I could probably put 2 grown adults in the back of this car and it wouldn't ride on the bump stops. It feels much more set up for a modern suspension. The newer Civics are a lot stiffer than the 8th gens were, and this pretty much brings it up to a sporty spec, in my opinion. So thanks for watching, guys. Leave a like, leave me a comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.